listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And we are your hairy, heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in. And we thought it would be great to start off 2020. I'm still not used to saying that. We're in the 20s, God. So we thought, let's start off with a special episode. What's been on a lot of people's lips? It's been The Rise of Skywalker. It's been The Mandalorian. It's been Star Wars. And in the past, yeah, we know Star Wars isn't exactly a comic book, but we're naturally going to be aligning our discussion with some Star Wars comic book talk. But we wanted to cover the movies. We wanted to cover the recent developments in one particular video game. In the past, when we've done the Star Wars episodes, those have been some of the most fun we've had while we've been recording this. So again, as we said, special episode, and what's best for a special episode are special guests. So we have with us from other podcasts, Mike Lovins and Craig Lance. I'm going to let the gentlemen introduce themselves. Mike, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm Mike Lovins from the Real Gay Movie Show. And occasionally you may have heard me on the Movie Bears podcast. So Star Wars is my bloodline. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, I'm Craig Lance. I'm with one of the co-hosts on Southern Fried Geekery podcast. We record weekly, mostly comic book stuff. Star Wars, like Mike, is my passion. So I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate the invite.
Okay, and I have to tell you, boys, he's taken by his wife. So
Good for him.
I have to tell you, Craig, don't be surprised if you get a few friend requests out of the blue.
That'll be fine.
From some of our most fervent listeners. And as you mentioned, Southern Fried Geekery is where our friend Caleb is also based. And you probably are bear by proxy just by, his appropriation of that element of culture. So.
Yeah, he calls me his straight husband. So.
I have a straight concert husband too, and God bless you all. Okay, so usually when we're talking about comic books and we have guests on the show, we do this little nonsense about starting from the start, where they first got into comic books. But since we have Star Wars as a topic, we're going to just go around, and this is including you and myself, Steve, about what our first exposure was to Star Wars. So, Craig, I've got you up right now on my screen right now, blinking, so why don't you start well with that?
Yeah, so I watched the original Star Wars before it was A New Hope in the movie theater. And a little inside baseball on me, I grew up in the carnival. So one of the ways my family could entertain us without us just running the carnival lot all the time was to go to the movies. So that summer that Star Wars came out, we probably went 20 to 30 times that summer.
Wow.
And yeah, I remember watching it. I was about 6 years old that summer. And I looked over at one of the people running with us, and I looked at him. I said, I'm not even sure who the good guys are. But I loved it. I was in awe, and still am to this day.
Awesome. How about you, Mike?
So for me, so I was born in 1975. So Empire Strikes Back actually was the very first movie I ever saw in the movie theater. So 1980. And then I think shortly after that, or they re-released A New Hope in the theater when they gave it A New Hope. It may have been, maybe it was before that. Either way, it was sometime around there that around the release of Empire Strikes Back that I saw both of those in the theater for the first time.
Awesome. Steve, how about you?
Well, I actually kind of started in the middle. I am a little bit younger, so the first one I ever saw was Empire Strikes Back, and it was on VHS after it had been released on VHS sort of in the mid-'80s. And I saw Empire first, then Return of the Jedi, listened to all of the Fisher-Price books on record to all of the movies, and then finally actually saw A New Hope when I was 8 or 9 years old on a school movie day. So basically I saw them in the wrong order. Mm-hmm. But after I'd seen all three of them, I think I had worn out the VHS tapes after multiple viewings. So, yeah. Unfortunately, I had never seen any of them in the movie theater until the special editions were released.
Wow.
You will know it's time to turn the page when you hear R2-D2 beep like this.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh man. Well, let me tell you about my first, but I have a story to feed into that. I was there from the start, I guess. My first exposure to Star Wars was the in-house ads in Marvel Comics right before the first issue came out, which was about like 7 weeks before the movie premiered. I didn't get the comic books 1 and 2 immediately, but I did see it on the first weekend. And I saw it at the RKO Stanley Warner, which was one of the original 32 theaters that had it in 70 millimeter. It's weird. I know the exact date I saw it, which was May 28th, 1977. And for the next 3 years, Star Wars was kind of my life. And it kind of ended for me in terms of like the fanaticism with Empire. Empire, that was my big multiple time in the theater. I saw that 19 times over that summer.
Yeah, it was so good, though.
Yeah. And when you were talking about that, I remember one of the earliest children's books was something like the Mission of the Missing Droid or something, and I recorded my own audiobook.
That's hilarious.
Reading the story, and I just remember going beep, and so that the page could turn. I really wish I still had that cassette. The things you do when you're a fan.
That's amazing.
And just for you guys, has Star Wars stayed with you? Because for me, the interest has waxed and waned. But it sounds like, at least for our two guests, that you guys stuck with it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's been just part of my life, my whole life, since I was 6 years old, and don't see it changing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, the movies kind of, after they were out of the theater, then we got them on VHS, so that brought back that excitement. And then there was the lull, and then we had the Timothy Zahn books. So it never really slowed down for me.
I agree with the Timothy Zahn book. So I'd seen the movies on VHS, I don't know how many millions of times. But when the Timothy Zahn books came out, I discovered a whole new side of Star Wars, because I hadn't read. I mean, I think I had seen a couple of the Ewoks comics, and of course I think by that time Disney Channel had shown the 2 horrible Ewoks movies that we'd been talking about prior to this. But it was those Timothy Zahn books, the Thrawn trilogy. It was a trilogy.
It was a trilogy.
And it was just so fascinating. From there, I discovered there's a lot more in the extended universe. I got the encyclopedia. It just started going through everything, picking up comics here and there, including the UK editions of Shadows of the Empire, and playing TIE Fighter on the PC and X-Wing. I mean, those were. I still can in my sleep do the whole A-Wing training mission through the Tatooine gorges, from the beginning of the first X-Wing game. But I mean, that's kind of where it accelerated, and then of course the special editions were finally released in the late 80s, leading up to the prequel trilogy.
Yeah. It seems for me it was that lead up to the special editions kind of got me back in somewhat. For some reason, it was Revenge of the Sith. That was the point I stayed.
Yeah. You're
mentioning the Thrawn books, Heir to the Empire. I bought the paperback of that book. I think it took me 4 years to actually open it up and read it. So a bad Star Wars fan here at points.
Did any of you, Bill, you may be the only one old enough, besides myself, to have seen the holiday special when it was actually on TV?
Oh, yeah. No, that was a big event. Where we lived, there were very few kids. So the kids where we lived, we were all really close to each other, the Weebers, the Alexudises, and me. We had a party to watch it, because that was a thing that people don't understand. Like, when you had these first continuations of the story, how seismic those events were. And for me, the big 3 were Star Wars #7, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and the holiday special.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really understand, who come into it now and have just a plethora of things available to them, whether they be canon or legends. we didn't have much, I've always thought that was why the Kenner toys were so important, because since there was so little official merchandise out, particularly in the realm of storytelling, you had the Marvel comic, you had the comics and Pizzazz magazine, you had the occasional books, that was it. So if you wanted new Star Wars stories, you created them yourself.
That's right. We talked about that on our podcast on Southern Fried Geekery when we did our toy special.
Yeah.
And how, you didn't have the videos. You didn't have VHS back then. So once it was out of the theater, the only chance you had for Star Wars was to play with the toys.
Mm.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, my stories are still canon.
No, for sure. They will always be.
They're still canon.
Well, one of the big things about having those toys, and I think they've mentioned it before, there are other, there's the Toys That Made Us kind of talked about this, where you were able to get to know who these characters were. And that's, they kept coming out with new, more and more action figures for even the most obscure characters that might have had 30 seconds or 3 seconds of screen time, but became so beloved by people who collected them and played with them that they got to know who these characters were. And there's a lot more, I guess, connection and, intimacy that's built up into the whole mythos, because you've touched this character, you've held this character in your hand, you've created stories with this character, that may have had a blip on the big screen or in a video, might have been cut from the 4:3 pan and scan version of the VHS that you've been watching, but you've got it in your hand now. You know exactly who Boba Fett is, or IG-88 or 86. You know who these characters are.
Or Yak Face.
My favorite Yak Face now.
I hope someone does an article, because I have a theory. You get to a point where you grow up and a lot of boys end up getting rid of their toys. I think the Darth Vader head and the C-3PO head carrying cases saved more figures than anything else, because you could get rid of everything else, but you would not get rid of the figures. And there's at least 2 people I know that's their history.
That's awesome. I wish I had all my toys from when I was a kid.
Oh,
Same.
God. I cry. Some of them had a nice afterlife, like the Mego 12-inch Lex Luthor was Barbie's father for years down the road. Like some of them had a decent afterlife, but and I still have some, but it drives me crazy. There are pictures of me with the Kenner alien, and if I could just get to that kid and say, "Stupid, don't give it away to the hospital,"
Don't be charitable with your toys. Keep
but
them.
I gotta say, at least with Star Wars, you've had the opportunity to get them all over again. And not every franchise that's available to you.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so let's start talking about the franchise and talk about the big event that was the culmination of the Skywalker saga in Rise of Skywalker Episode 9. When we do these roundtables, I tend to go to Steve because it's a natural handoff. Steve, do you just want to give like a very basic overview of what went down in Rise of Skywalker?
Sure.
Or we can skip it too. I'm just so used to doing that for you. So
Yeah, no problem. But the funny thing was, I was actually going through, and like I usually do, I try to make notes on kind of hitting the high points. And doing that for this movie, you don't realize how many different set pieces and, quote unquote, major story moments are in this movie until you start trying to list them off. And you're like, oh, okay, well, starting off, the Emperor is feared to actually still be alive because a message comes out of nowhere. That, of course, being a major issue for, some fan people. But, so, of course, you've got Kylo Ren travels to Exegol, to this planet, the birthplace of the Sith, to find out the truth from the Emperor. You've got Rey, who's training with General Leia, and then also, following this message and following the intel that they get, goes off with the usual crew to the planet, I believe it's Basana, to go and try and find a wayfinder in order to get to Exegol. And all sorts of things happen in between. They make several other planet stops. We've got a cute little new, absolutely adorable entry to the canon of Babu Frick shows up. We've got basically a little bit of an insight into Poe's backstory. We've got an introduction of other Force-sensitive former stormtroopers that have escaped and are now living on the ocean moon of Endor, where the second Death Star met its end, and the ruins are located. We've also got Rey having visions of herself as the Empress and trying to throw it all away. We've got General Leia sacrificing herself to basically distract her son just long enough for Rey to deal what could be a finishing blow, although she does heal him, and in the process helps Kylo Ren find Ben Solo again. There's so many great moments in this. There's so many great confrontations between Kylo Ren and Rey. In fact, 3 major ones. The final clash between the two of them on that ocean moon. And then, of course, the final confrontation on the ground against the resurrected Emperor, and in the sky between what's left of the Resistance, and then, of course, the rest of the galaxy against the Final Order's planet-killing Star Destroyer fleet. Pretty fantastic, pretty amazing, lots of big moments that make it difficult to kind of give a comprehensive understanding of the plot in other than giant moments here and there. So obviously, if you've seen the movie, you kind of get all the little bits and pieces in between and the sort of bits of canon and lore that pop up here and there about Rey's parentage, the slightly more involved appearance of the Knights of Ren. I don't know what purpose they serve other than just kind of dudes in armor with weapons running around in the background and getting easily defeated by Kylo. Action figures, exactly. And then, of course, the transformation and growth of Kylo Ren, who actually has his, full hero's arc in this episode, where you get to see him go from his most ruthless appearance in the film series to bringing back Ben Solo. And I don't know if anybody noticed that as well, but when Rey heals him after that final confrontation with him on the ocean moon, she also heals his scar.
Yes.
On his face, transforming him in a way that makes him look younger again, basically giving him a second chance to make that choice that he made in The Force Awakens to kill Han Solo. So it's very, there's a lot of really great moments and a lot of great things that can be fleshed out. But why don't we actually just start talking about how we felt about the movie?
Mike, Craig, whoever wants to go first, please chime in.
First of all, just good job on that summary. I did the same thing for my show, and it took me an hour and a half.
It's crazy. There's just so much if you try to go like scene by scene.
Yeah, and that's what I did. But I absolutely loved this movie. I loved everything about it. To me, it's probably in my top 3 at this point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll echo that. I love this movie. I still have a hard time putting anything that isn't the original trilogy in the top 3. But it's definitely up there. I really liked this movie, and honestly I have such a hard time accepting the hate that this movie has gotten.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
When did Star Wars fans become such assholes? Series Trek's one
1998.
thing. Yeah, but it just really seems that in the last, I wouldn't even say with Force Awakens, it seemed to be like a post-Force Awakens. To me, it feels like there's some people who are very disgruntled that when they look into themselves, they're more Empire or First Order than Rebellion or Jedi, and they lash out.
With that. Have you guys noticed, and I don't want to get political in any way, but have you noticed that for me, it's more of my conservative-minded friends that hate on the new Star Wars?
I think that's fair in terms of people I know.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially I think when it comes to criticism. No, maybe not so much on the overall concept, but I think criticism of, Rey being kind of a Mary Sue, or Poe not being the hero that they want Poe to be, Poe / Finn. And then strangely enough, how General Leia is treated in the new trilogy, where, I mean, some of that you really can't help it because Carrie Fisher passed away, so they can't really, flesh out anything else.
Right.
That we had enough to give us some resonance, I thought was amazing.
Exactly.
That we had something to work on.
I was very impressed with how they did that too.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was seamless.
That little bit too, that I read about afterwards, that there's that mostly CGI moment, that flashback where Leia and Luke are training together.
Yeah.
And they pull up their blast shields and you see a younger Luke and a younger Leia.
Yeah. It was Billy Lord who was Leia in that scene.
What'd you say?
It was Billy Lord, her daughter.
That was
Leia
exactly.
In that scene. Yeah.
It was Billy Lord as the physical stand-in for Carrie Fisher that they were able to do, which I thought was it's very, it's a little bit maudlin, I think, the way I felt about it. But knowing that and going back and seeing the movie again just kind of made me feel all sorts of other fifis. Knowing that she got to basically be her mother or act as her mother for the scene in Star Wars as a fitting end, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Hey, and we got to see Leia hold a lightsaber. I mean, that's just amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna say. I mean, that's stuff that previously was just fan fiction.
Right.
From the comics or from the books, like being able to see, hey, Leia is a Jedi.
Hell, imagine that. She could use the Force in The Last Jedi. Why? Oh, she was actually Anakin's daughter and a Jedi.
Yeah. I'm with you guys. I really enjoyed it. There were some things about the film that I really liked. I loved that the main characters were mostly together for the film.
Yeah.
Because I think that was one area of Force Awakens and Last Jedi that we could have had more of that in the treatment. There's so many parts where I don't want to tear up. I mean, when we had the teaser commercial with C-3PO saying, "I want to have one last look with my friends," I mean, I had to go down to the bar to get a drink at the hotel, because it was just like I don't want to say goodbye either.
Speaking of 3PO, I think he had some of the best moments in that movie.
He did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Especially because R2 wasn't there. This movie, they actually split them up for 90% of it.
Yeah.
And it was 3PO on his own interacting with the rest of the team, which I think was great for Mr. Daniels. He got to really be 3PO as much as 3PO could be.
Yeah.
But like you said, had some great lines and some great moments.
Yeah.
For my feelings about the last three films, I thought Force Awakens was maybe not the movie I wanted, but the movie we needed. It was to me, like a really good cover version of a song I love.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean that in the best possible sense. And thinking if this is somebody's first Star Wars movie, they're locked. They're going to fall in love with something there. And just in terms of the characters, I felt, for the Principal Three, maybe it's our third time around with them, but they seem to be more fleshed out. All three of them, the interaction seemed more natural than scripted, because I did think in some of the earlier bits, the writers were trying to show how clever they were with the dialogue instead of serving the characters. This is really nitpicky stuff. This is really nitpicky film fan stuff. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Just going back, since it was kind of like a Star Wars fan bar fight, where did you guys fall with Last Jedi? Because I adored it.
Honestly, if you take out all of the Canto Bight stuff, I think it's a perfect movie, fantastic movie.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't like any of the Canto Bight stuff.
I think that, I do kind of agree that it was a bit shoehorned. I mean, I enjoyed Canto Bight for what it was, but in the context of the rest of the film, it kind of
it just takes you out of it.
Flow. Yeah, it chunked up the flow. Like it didn't really go or fit in where it was. Now that could be an editing decision, it could be all due to writing, but I think that there were other choices they could have made to have that relationship and Finn and Rose be exciting characters somewhere else doing something else, possibly with the rest of the gang. Because that's, like Bill, like you said, this, Rise of Skywalker, I think, was able to have everybody together for the majority of the film, whereas Last Jedi split them apart for most of it, and not in sort of like a satisfying narrative way, but in sort of a, well, we got to cover a lot of ground, so we'll just send them over there, have them do that thing, and then whatever. Again, nitpicky, because I did enjoy the movie, but I think it could have been more enjoyable.
I do think with the Canto bits, I agree with you, but I also think Rose freeing the creatures is one of the most Star Wars moves you can have. And I really like that bit, and I think that gets lost in some of the criticism because, it could have been out of Attack of the Clones, let's face it.
That could have been like
I loved it. I loved it as well. The Canto bite didn't bother me, except I agree with what you were saying about the editing choices of it and where it was placed in the film, because it seemed to break the tension a bit that you had built up in the other scenes. However, it was in there for a purpose, and that was that all three of the heroes in this movie failed hard.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you needed the Canto bite to have that failure.
You still, here's something that my husband and I have talked about. You could have still accomplished something like that by, Rose. They made it out that she's a very smart character. They should, instead of having to like go find a master codebreaker, I wish they would have done something more with like them trying to figure out a way to just get from one ship to the other, and her being smart enough to be the one that can, and then they could have still failed at that, but they could have made her character so much stronger even.
Good point, and it would have helped to not break the tension that you had every time it switched back to Canto bite.
Correct.
Yeah. It was like they wanted to throw in a casino scene.
I think for sure they wanted that.
Right.
Yeah, they wanted the cantina scene that they have in every Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And, also with Last Jedi, with it being the Empire Strikes Back analog where everything goes to hell, it's hit its marks, I think, in a lot of ways. But I thought a lot of Luke's arc, though, 9-year-old me would have totally disagreed with the way Luke progressed. As a man in my early 50s, I'm a lot more in tune with where you end up is not a straight line.
Yeah.
And for people who are middle-aged, I think they can relate to that a lot more.
Yeah, well, Haunted Luke is a much better character development than just, badass Jedi Luke.
Yeah. I think what's interesting, looking at, like, talking about Luke, and I know we're kind of just following some interesting tangent flow here, but talking about Luke and looking at how he changed from the episodes 4 through 6 trilogy to how he appeared in 8 and 9. I mean, he seemed to grow pretty rapidly in his Jedi abilities between, I would say, Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Freaking Mary Sue.
Well, yeah, within a year, he basically became almost a Jedi Master. And, I had to go back and double check the timeline. I'm like, I thought it was maybe more than a couple years that he was off training somewhere, getting that cool black suit, like whatever. No, it's just a year. And this is a guy who started off by blowing up the most powerful weapon in the universe with just, one shot. That he progressed so much in his Jedi abilities. By the third movie, he was practically a Jedi Master himself, flipping around all over the place. And
right.
But contrasting him to how he appeared in 8, like Bill said, he had kind of given up. He had exiled himself. He felt like he was a failure. He was in the Obi-Wan Kenobi phase of being a Jedi, like grumpy, hating himself, and just like, I just don't want to deal with people anymore.
And doesn't it freak you out that Mark Hamill was older than Alec Guinness when he filmed that?
Yes.
Really? Because Alec Guinness looked a lot older.
Yeah, that freaks me out.
Well, the best moment that Luke has, because of course he has a small role or a small appearance in Rise of Skywalker. The moment that made me tear up was when Rey goes back to basically, like, I'm going to exile myself here in this island. Like, I'm just going to burn everything and never leave again. And, he convinces her that she's got everything she needs, that she's got the Wayfinder there, that she can go off to Exegol. As he raises his X-Wing from where he dumped it decades prior. That's the end of his arc from his first training on Dagobah, because he never did raise the X-Wing. He was never really able to do that. And here he is, dead, raising up the X-Wing, like, here you go.
Yeah.
Look at me. And that look of pride on his face was done purposefully. Like, Mark Hamill's like, look, I finally did it. I finally raised my X-Wing from the swampy waters of this ocean.
And how durable are X-Wings?
They must be really... Hey, what's that blip over there? It's something we haven't seen for about 30 years, but apparently it's still broadcasting pretty damn well and going through hyperspace without a problem.
Well, and just a nitpicky thing, in the Last Jedi, wasn't Luke's door one of the wings?
Yeah.
I never noticed that. I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, it is. They ignored.
Also, going back to Rise of Skywalker, I was also very satisfied with Kylo Ren's arc. I wish I could claim this, but it is another friend of mine who said he went from emo to power metal, which I think is the perfect description of how his arc transpired. And I thought it was a damn good performance by Adam Driver.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
One of the better performances from an acting standpoint in a Star Wars film in that last.
Well, you know, from the time after he talks to Han Solo to the end of the movie, he only says one word, and that's "ow."
Yeah.
Well,
and yet he's still able to emote all of those emotions to you through his acting ability without any lines, without any dialogue.
Exactly, and he does it in a very simple way, because he's basically just walking around in a long sleeve t-shirt and tactical pants. Like that's his whole outfit after he ditches the Kylo Ren massive, cape and fancy uniform and everything. It's just basically him in a t-shirt and jeans, kicking ass.
Yeah.
In the last scene.
He stopped at the Gap on the way there.
He did, yeah. It was like, I just need something simple. I got $20. I'll just get whatever's on clearance. But he in that scene, he is wearing basically the Luke Skywalker special outfit, which is just simple black top, simple black bottoms, and there you go.
Yeah, the Skywalker black.
The Skywalker black.
Real quick on the Kylo Ren thing is, before the movie came out, as I had said that if they redeem him, that would be the one thing that would make me unhappy.
Mm.
But they did it so well that I had zero problems with it.
Yeah, I was hoping, I should say, I wasn't hoping for a redemption story, but agreed. The way that they did it was very satisfying.
Yeah.
Okay, so around the horn, how many times have you guys seen this movie at this point? I'm only at 2.
Yeah, I'm only at 2. Yeah.
4? 4 and 5. Okay.
Yeah, 4 for Craig, 5 for Mike, I think.
All right.
Yep.
All right, Mike, you get the gold star right now in terms of attendance.
I bought the Regal app so I can go for 55 cents each time. So
oh wow!
I'm gonna go a few more times before it goes out.
Yeah, we have one Regal in the area, but it's not part of that promotion.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the AMC A-List has afforded me the ability to see it multiple times in various formats.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Yeah, my husband and I just got the A-List this week, in fact. So I'm, starting to enjoy the benefits of getting to see 3 movies a week, which is nice. Ad for AMC, apparently. But it is definitely a good way to see things that you would probably otherwise not have spent your money or time on.
Yeah. Right.
All right, well, let's keep things moving along. And the other big event, I don't know if that's the proper parlance it should be used, but I think it has become one, is the Mandalorian series on Disney+. Steve, throwing the baton over to you. Just give us a quick synopsis of what that show is about, a.k.a. the Baby Yoda show.
Well, okay. I did the same thing here, kind of sketched the simplest of outlines for this, because it is 8 episodes, technically an 8-hour long-form film, basically. So The Mandalorian is nameless for 7 of the 8 episodes, and just goes by Mando. Does bounty work, and he ends up taking a bounty for a former Imperial client, played wonderfully by Vanna Herzog. I was just shocked to actually see him in this show. But he did an amazing job. Super creepy.
And apparently he lobbied hard for a role in this.
Yeah, you know, for somebody who spends a lot of time and, you know, has most of his career sort of excoriating general pop culture and criticizing sort of, you know, this kind of event, becomes a part of it and does an amazing job. I don't know if it's irony or if it was, I don't know, who knows.
Let's not think about it too hard.
Yeah, no, I don't want to, because I don't want to ruin it for myself. But, you know, so he takes the bounty from the Imperial client, and it turns out that the bounty is not a criminal or some kind of object. It's actually what appears to be a baby version of Yoda, causing the Meme-averse to explode over the past couple of months. I don't think anybody's timeline on any of their social apps is, you know, free of Baby Yoda sipping soup or smiling or playing Megadeth really loud. You know, it's just basically
Or my absolute favorite, Chicky Nuggies.
Chicky Nuggies! Yes, exactly. So, of course, Mando has a change of heart when he's with the baby, with the child, and realizes he cannot just leave him to the Imperials. So after turning him in, changing his mind, he rescues the child and then tries to go on the run to protect him, finally realizing that that's just not possible. He's going to have to confront what he thinks has been dogging him this whole time, the client, and ends up returning to the original planet that he was on at the invite of Grief, played by Carl Weathers, which is really awesome. He, of course, collects other allies along the way, a former assassin droid turned Nani droid, IG-11, Queel, played by Nick Nolte, just a grumpy Ugnaught who has spoken, and therefore that is it. And Cara Dune, of course, played by former MMA fighter who I unfortunately forgot to write down her name. But anyway,
Gina Carano.
Gina Carano, yes. And you know, they go to confront what they think is the client, and it turns out basically it is another heretofore unheard of former Imperial, Moff Gideon, who somehow is in possession of a Darksaber, but has been trying to get the Baby Yoda for his own nefarious purposes. They do escape. Everybody's more or less okay. Some do blow up. And of course we're left with Mandalorian and the Baby Yoda together, riding off into the sunset, pursued not too far behind by Moff Gideon and his Mandalorian Darksaber, opening up a whole bunch of questions.
Wonderful questions.
Okay, Mike, since you grabbed that baton, what have you been thinking about Mandalorian as you've been watching it?
Oh, man. Here's the thing. I do think that the show drags a little bit in the middle of the series, but as a whole, the story is amazing. The behind the scenes of this show is that this show is made by people who love Star Wars and love the lore, and you can tell with everything that they've done in this show that there is a respect for some of what's come before, especially Dave Filoni being the creator and executive producer of Clone Wars and Rebels. There's so much that from those shows that have seeped into The Mandalorian, just expanding that lore. And I had the largest release of an oh my god moment when I saw the Darksaber in that last episode.
Yeah, something, Steve, you said, and I'm going to go to Mike and Craig because I think you guys are far more knowledgeable about this. Is it a Darksaber or is it the Darksaber?
The
okay, yeah.
It's the Darksaber.
What my recollection from Rebels was.
Yeah, it's I mean, the Darksaber, here's this, purely Mandalorian relic of, the first Mandalorian racial Mandalorian Jedi that's now in the possession of this former Imperial. What's really interesting, and that actually was one of the big questions that I had, given the showrunner's history with Rebels, and the fact that Mandalorians were a really big part of that show, and they were often showing their face, and of course the planet still existed. I mean, we're talking, I think this does take place after Return of the Jedi.
That's right. 5 years.
Well, yeah, but well before Force Awakens. So somehow in the 19-year period from the creation of, or the, I guess the start of Episode 4 and the end. Well, actually, no. I guess since the start of the Empire, something happened to Mandalore and the people and the culture to make it so they couldn't remove their helmets. The Darksaber somehow made into the possession of the Empire again, and everything kind of changed. Now, obviously, they're not gonna retcon all of the Mandalorian history if Rebels is canon, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think it all stems from when they keep mentioning the Great Purge, and I think that's something that happened in that time frame, and the Empire coming in and pretty much wiping out the Mandalorians, and at that point, then it's probably a security thing, to keep their faces hidden, and but yeah, that's all kind of new.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's post the Great Purge. Everything before the Great Purge, they had numbers. They didn't have to hide their identities. Now it's, as Mike said, it's to protect their identities and protect the few of them that are left.
Mm. Yeah, and the interesting thing, though, is that they aren't necessarily racially Mandalorian. I think that was one of the interesting parts of this, is that
they're a creed.
They're a creed now rather than, a planetary race of people.
Another way to build your numbers, I guess.
I guess so. And, just making everybody kind of the same because they're all masked, creates that sense of community, where it goes beyond sort of, planetary origin and whatnot. But it is interesting, and I'm really curious to see if in the second season, because of course this has been renewed. There's no doubt that they'll explore that a little bit more, and how Gideon came to be in control of the Darksaber.
Yeah, I think we'll see that in the second, and we're going to learn more about the Great Purge too as it goes. So they're not going to reveal everything in the first season.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
and they didn't need to.
Right.
Yeah.
With the way that the show was formatted, that there was mysteries hanging over so many aspects.
Right.
I think added to the very particular feel of the show.
Yeah, and I just want to pay Herzog to read the phone book. I mean, his lines were so good. Show me the child.
Well, actually, speaking of Herzog, what was everybody's favorite cameo? Because there were a lot. There were a lot of people, a lot of actors, comedians, etc., that took part in the making of the show.
I think Amy Sedaris as Ripley. Yeah. It just kept getting better and better as the episode went on. Yeah.
The
I don't even know you could call it a cameo, but that may have been my favorite bit.
The boots with the spurs.
Boba Fett.
Yeah, I mean, that's the assumption.
Mm-hmm.
I think mine was when Dave Filoni and two of the other directors showed up in X-Wings.
Yeah.
That's who they were.
Oh, yeah, Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, and I can't remember the other guy's name.
And you guys know the heavy gunner Mandalorian was Favreau, right?
Yes.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. At least voiced.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, that suit's probably not big enough to contain the dude at this point.
And there were so many little touches that I liked. Like we had never seen stormtroopers with dirty uniforms.
Yeah.
Right. And I just that visual puts you in a different place than you've been before.
Well, and the attention to detail too, as far as like the client's stormtroopers were all dirty, but then when Gideon shows up, His are all pristine and clean. You know, just just even that difference between the Empire there.
Yeah. Well, and seeing Death Troopers for the first time since Rogue One,
right,
was really interesting too. It's like, oh well, this is where they all went to. They just kind of hung out with him for a bit. But I thought it was really clever. You got to see a lot of aspects of the Outer Rim, or like this area, this frontier area outside of the New Republic space, where there's still, you've got really a revisioning of the Wild West. You've got what could potentially be considered, the remnants of the Confederate Army that just escaped west and are still trying to, hold together some kind of semblance of order, and just the usual mercenaries and settlements. It's cool.
That follows along with the expanded universe canon, the book Bloodlines, where the Empire has kind of went out to the Outer Rim and is reforming as the First Order. And of course they've got the politicians back, in the core systems trying to get laws passed for their agendas, basically. But so it follows right along with the expanded universe that the Empire would be out in the Outer Rim.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, and anybody else feel free to chime in here too, but did you read the Aftermath books?
I did.
Okay, so here's a question I want to ask. Going back to Rise of Skywalker just for a second. The character that Hugh Grant's brother, Richard E. Grant, the character that he played, I think, to have this former Imperial person that's still loyal to the Emperor and stuff like that, it would have been a really nice treat if it had been Ray Sloane instead of him.
I agree. I mean, more Ray Sloane, the better. So
that would have been the perfect way, because we didn't know who this adjutant general was. So people who didn't read those books, it wouldn't matter if they knew who she was or not. But for the people who did, that would have been a nice touch.
Yeah, kind of like Admiral Holdo was kind of a nice touch from the books that they brought into The Last Jedi. Yeah,
but the character from that book was written after Last Jedi was being made. Yeah. Ray Sloane has been in these books now for years, but I digress. But that was just one of those little things I wanted to.
I do have a question for you two guys, since you're far more in tune than I am, and I assume Steve, with the elimination of the different levels of canon when Disney took over and the new canon, has it been pretty tight among the books and the other materials?
I feel like it has. They've made a couple of little minor errors. The they can fly now thing that was in the Rise of Skywalker. We saw stormtroopers that could fly in the Poe Dameron comic book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For instance, in the novelization of The Force Awakens, Poe and Rey actually meet each other, but then at the end of the Last Jedi movie, it's like the first time they ever were in the same room together. So a couple of little things, but nothing real major. And the books have been really good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like the books and the comics and the canon outside of the movies, even though it's supposed to all be canon together, the stuff outside of the movies, I think, have done a better job of sticking with what each other is doing and pulling in references and stuff like that, more so than the movies keeping track of what's going on outside of the movies. But there's little things here and there that the movies have done. But for the most part, it's more the stuff, the books and the comics and stuff that's really getting it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, that's Mandalorian. Now we're going to throw it over to you two gentlemen by yourselves, because neither Steve and I could say shit about this next thing, which is the Jedi Fallen Order video game, which from every Star Wars fan that I know is just loving.
Yeah, Mike, you want to go ahead, because I only played about half of this. I love the game, but I have not completed it. So.
Okay. Yeah, so I have finished it. I actually just started playing it again. Because here's the thing, it is not an easy game.
No.
And so it does give you the option to play in a story mode, so you can get through the fights a little bit easier and stuff like that. And I really, as soon as I got the game, I played through it in story mode just because people were starting to leak things about what happened during the game, and I didn't want to be spoiled. So I was like, I want to get through it, and then I'll go back through and challenge myself. I got to say, as a game, it's fun, it's great. As a Star Wars story, it's fantastic.
I mean to finish the story.
Yeah, I mean,
when does the video game, in terms of the timeline, when does that take place?
It's within, I want to say within a year or so.
It's 5 years after Revenge of the Sith.
It is 5 years? Okay.
Yeah,
I knew
because when he finds
wasn't too long after Order 66.
Yeah, when he finds the Jedi starship on the scrapper that they're looking at the beginning, he mentions that it had been 5 years.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So, I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry.
The gameplay is a lot of fun in it. The story up to where I'm at is a lot of fun. The part that bothers me just a little bit is I really don't like games where I unlock a power and then have to go back to places I've already visited to go complete those areas.
Yeah, it does do that. There's really only about 4 actual locations in this game, so it does require you to go back and forth a couple times to retread on a mission.
Yeah.
Now, just a general question in terms of other games that you may have played. A couple of the more recent Star Wars game releases have not been received as well. I'm thinking about Battlefront 1 and 2, which although the second Battlefront did have an amazing storyline,
right?
But it was short.
It was short. And it also
not according to the cutscenes that I watched.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like the actual gameplay around that, not great. I think that's the biggest complaint about is that it looks pretty. It's got all the fixings, but absolutely no meat and potatoes to it.
And it's EA Sports with all of their loot crates and people paying to play and that sort of thing. So,
and there's actually a book that is kind of a prequel to the game, and if you read that book, it kind of helps expand that story so it doesn't feel as meh. But but and here's the thing, I will say that is part of I think an issue with Disney era Star Wars is that there are things that could be considered to feel incomplete if you don't go and read like a prequel book or a book that, a conjoining book or whatever. And people don't know that necessarily, but after you go back and read it, the stuff, you're like, man, that really fills in a lot of gaps or makes something make so much more sense.
Yeah, for instance, the book Bloodlines I talked about earlier, if you want to know how the First Order got started, you have to have read that book. Because that's the only place you're going to find it is in the expanded universe. So right. I agree with that completely, is that's one thing that I feel that Disney has not quite got right.
And there's a book called Catalyst, which is basically a prequel to Rogue One, and it gives you so much backstory on all of those characters and how they know each other and stuff. Where I feel like stuff from that book could have actually been made into a crawl for Rogue One, and they could have done a crawl.
Oh, I agree.
Well, that's and that is kind of an interesting point. Do you feel that what we've come to expect from Star Wars is a lot more backstory fleshed out in something other than a crawl, because there's been so much. I mean, obviously, when the original 3 films were released, I mean, there weren't any expectations for this first Star Wars movie. It was just sort of like, here you are, action's happening, there's an empire, there's a rebellion, here's the movie. And, you know, since then, and even with Empire, like, stuff happened in between Star Wars and Empire. If you weren't reading the comics, you know, you may not have gotten any of that or any kind of idea what happened, but the crawl kind of, you know, fills you in a little bit. Like, it's been about 3 years, the rebels are kind of in a crappy place, you know. And I think one of the biggest complaints with Rise of Skywalker, especially the reemergence of the Emperor as even in existence, is that it's just revealed in the crawl. And if this were 1983, or if this came out, say, in 1985, and the Emperor was still alive, that's all we would have cared about, is what's in the crawl. Yeah. We wouldn't have been expecting so much more information prior to this. But it does seem that since the Disney era came out, there's so many opportunities for storytelling and to present it with much more, you know, much more completion, that it's kind of like, well, what do you mean this happened off screen?
Well, unfortunately, that just goes to the whole thing that there was no realized plan to go, you know, all the way through. Each movie was kind of its own thing. And also, I do think that the passing of Carrie Fisher kind of put them in a situation where whatever they may have had planned needed to get changed pretty quick.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the prequels spoiled us a little bit when you're talking about backstory, because we went, you know, 30 years with the only way we knew how Palpatine became the Emperor was a little line at the novelization of A New Hope, and like the preamble before it starts, that, you know, the Senator Palpatine, you know, crowned himself Emperor. That's all it was.
Yeah. Very true. So, yeah, and actually, yeah, the prequels, I think, did kind of change that expectation in the movies a little bit, because you got every bit of detail of how so-and-so did something, you know, whatever.
And yet we still don't have any canon on how Palpatine became a Sith.
True.
In my head, the book Plagueis is canon.
Until they tell us differently, yes. But officially not canon, but why, you know, until it's different, may as well live with it.
Well, when young Palpatine was at his corner store, he found sort of an ad in the back of a comic book. It's like Charles Atlas, but for Sith, and you know, the rest is history. That's all you need to worry about.
Wow.
Sith Atlas. That's it. It's like you know, bullies kicking sand in your face, rip them apart with Force lightning. Here, we'll teach you how. You know, with so many games over the past, I think, 30 years, if we're talking about if we're not including the original arcade game for Star Wars, they've had a lot. There's been a ton of video games out there. I mentioned the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, but also all the Jedi Academy and even the early Battlefront stuff. I think for Xbox had some.
Yeah, those and Republic Commando,
Knights of the Old Republic, the 1 and 2.
Did X-Wing Squadron come out of video games, or was that a comic book?
I think that was a video game.
Yeah,
there were several.
There was an X-Wing game, at least. Yeah,
there were several. Yeah, that I think it was X-Wing and then TIE Fighter and then TIE Fighter 2.
And there was X-Wing Squadron and Rogue Squadron books as well.
Yep.
Oh, and Force Unleashed.
I loved the first one.
Yeah.
The second one I thought was okay, but the first one was groundbreaking, I thought.
Oh, yeah.
I remember playing The Empire Strikes Back on my Atari.
Nice.
I remember playing Super Star Wars on the Super Nintendo and actually beating the damn thing, because I learned how to do it pretty well. That was one of those platformers where you just had to memorize everything.
Yeah.
Well, I remember playing Assault on the Death Star for the Kenner game, the tabletop.
Oh, yeah. I remember that
That's
as
my
well.
Star Wars gaming.
I just bought the remake of that game with the Tarkin action figure.
Yeah, I did too.
Oh my God.
I could not pass that up.
No,
I still have my original one. I haven't bought the reissue.
So, funny story on mine is they sent it we ordered it from Target online, and they sent it to our neighbor's house, and no one lives at that house, so it never got delivered to us. So we called and had them ship it again. And then I was walking down the street and saw it sitting on the front porch of the neighbor's house and went and picked it up, and it had been rained on. So there was no reason to take it back. I just opened it up and pulled out my Tarkin action figure. So I had the first one, and then the one still in the game unopened.
Going through your history, just when you find like little treasures like that, is there something, not necessarily something that you own, but something that you could have picked up that you still kick yourself? For me, Carmine Infantino, who drew a good amount of the Star Wars comics, used to sell his comic art at my local comic shop.
Oh, wow.
And the covers and the splash pages were $15, and the pages were $10. And as a little kid, that was like way out of my range. But I could have just gotten one, a Christmas gift or something.
Yeah,
so that's my thing. Like, God, I wish I could have grabbed that.
As an adult, I've been fortunate enough that I can buy what I want to when it comes to that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. As a kid, my dream was a Millennium Falcon, and it took me forever to get that, but I finally did get it. So, luckily when it came to Star Wars, I pretty much got the toys I wanted as a kid. So I never saw the comic art, though, because then that would be my want.
Yep.
Yeah, I had the Millennium Falcon. I really wanted an X-Wing, and I ended up getting a Y-Wing. And I was kind of disappointed, but when I look back at it now, the Y-Wing was such a cool ship.
It was.
But I never did get my X-Wing.
Steve, anything you can contribute here? Or?
That's the thing. When I was a kid, I didn't get many toys. Like, I wasn't a big buy me toys kind of person, but I also never had any money for myself until when I did, and then I spent it all on comics. And, I never did have the full set of Kenner action figures. I never did get a Millennium Falcon or anything really cool like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's anything I missed. I mean, obviously, if I was cognizant enough to say to my folks, hey, could you get me a Darth Vader head set of, carrying case for that? I think it would have been awesome, but I had a friend who had one. And it was fun looking at all his figures, and then
I would say up to the second wave of Empire with Kenner, I had everything.
Yeah,
only child, so I had basically everything. I didn't have the R2-D2 that was comparable with the 12-inch figures because I had an R2-D2 radio that was about the same size, which was a Kenner product too. That was the only one where I don't remember having it, but all that stuff, Droid Factory and the Sears set. I'm gonna cry. It's all gone. But the figures are there because of the damn Darth Vader head.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was an early bird. I don't know if you were, Craig.
I was not. I actually started collecting the toys between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, so just my age in there, I guess, is all it was. But that's when I started collecting. So I did not get the early bird, unfortunately.
Another sad memory I have is spilling an entire bowl of Rice Krispies on the poster that was in the original album.
Oh no!
With that amazing dogfight. And there was no.
So I'll tell you my sad story for my Star Wars toys. When I was about 12 years old, I moved from my mom's house to my dad's house, and my mom would not let me take my Star Wars toys with me because moving into the new place, I had 4 step siblings. So she's like, no, they're just going to get ruined there. Just leave them here. Well, she moved out of the place we were living in, left my brother there and all of our toys there. My brother gave them to somebody that he owed a bunch of money to.
Oh, God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's what happened to all my Star Wars toys.
Now, I lost all of my Star Wars toys to my brother too, but he's 10 years younger than I am, and my mom used to let him take them into the bathtub and play with them, and they just all got destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, for me, that was the Mego figures that just totally got destroyed, but that was me doing it. We had this game called Elevator Crash, because I was so fascinated. The Towering Inferno, there's a scene where Jennifer Jones falls to her death, but it's not so much that they just have her fall to her death. She first smashes against the side of the next building and then falls to her death. It's amazing to watch. And so, like, from there, we had this game we started called Elevator Crash, where we would take a shoebox and rig it up with fishing wire and reel it over the banister and then yank it. And it was usually filled with Mego figures because they would fit in the shoe boxes better than like G.I. Joe or whatever. And like, oh no, the elevator's going to crash. And then it would be just like action figure Vietnam. And I don't see myself as particularly gung-ho type of, let's go to war type of person. I don't know why we had an interest in that. At least I never burned stuff. That's a step too far. Yeah. As far as
Clearly, you got it all out when you were young on your poor action figures.
Yeah. See, I just screwed it up though, because we had a very nice transition over to the Star Wars comic books that I could have utilized, but then we went off on a tangent. But that's okay, because that happens on shows like this. So we're next going to talk about Star Wars comics that we would recommend for people who don't know the history of Star Wars comics. It was a franchise that was, again, very much pre-Disney, with Marvel from 1977 to 1986, with the last few Ewoks issues, and then was dormant until, I believe, early 1992 or late 1991 with Dark Horse. It was Dark Empire was the first comic, right? That Dark Horse did?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Sounds
correct.
right. Yeah.
And they had that franchise until 2013, and then it came back to Marvel. There are numerous books that are being published now. There's been somewhat of a retraction a little bit. At one point it was like they were publishing, I want to say, like 9 books a month. It seems to have pulled back a little bit now. But I just want to go around the horn here with people about a particular comic book, whether it's a particular issue or a run or an arc, anything that you would recommend to people to read. Mike, you for some reason are blinking on mine, so I think that's a good sign that I'll start with you. What's a Star Wars comic book that you would like to talk about?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I've been very excited about a lot of the comic books that have been coming out since the Disney era. But because I was so excited about Jedi Fallen Order, the video game, of course there was a comic book tie-in. And so it was just a 5-issue run. It's called Jedi Fallen Order Dark Temple. And it's a prequel to the game, but it spans 2 different time frames, both before the time of the game, but it kind of gives 2 stories that kind of parallel each other. But it focuses around the character Cere, who is a former Jedi in the video game, but in the comic book she is a Padawan. And like I said, it's 5 issues. It just wrapped up in December, so should still be able to find those. And if you like the video game, it's a nice little backstory.
Nice.
Okay, cool. Craig, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna bring up The Rise of Kylo Ren. It's a miniseries that's out right now. It's only on issue 2. And it's telling the story, of course, of Ben and Luke's relationship, and it's jumping back and forth from when he's a kid to post the scene you see in The Last Jedi where they have their conflict and the destruction of the Jedi Temple. And it's introducing him to the Knights of Ren. Been really good so far. There's a scene in it where Luke and Ben are in a Jedi temple, an old Jedi temple that they find, and the Knights of Ren show up, and Luke looks at him and says, "Hey, you guys just want to leave now, or do you want to wait till I send you out crying?" And it's really rather great because that's what he does. He sends them out crying. So it's kind of interesting. Going to be fun to see that whole connection. It's got Snoke in it. You find out that the damage to Snoke is from Luke. So, yeah.
I'm enjoying that one too.
Yeah.
Nice. Steve, how about you?
Well, I've actually, when Marvel re-released the Star Wars series or released the new Star Wars series, I guess 6 years ago now, I did jump onto that. And of course, that series took place immediately after the Battle of Yavin, from the first Star Wars film, From A New Hope. They've relaunched the Star Wars title, the adjectiveless Star Wars title, to take place immediately after the events in Empire Strikes Back, and sort of explain where the rebellion was immediately following Bespin, where everybody kind of is trying to get to, and of course, that lead up to Return of the Jedi that happens a year later. Charles Soule is back writing this, and I know he's kind of up and down a little bit in quality, but I think with Jesus Saiz on art for this one, it's absolutely gorgeous. And whoever is constructing the layout of the book, it feels the way, at least this first issue, feels like watching the start of a new film. I mean, the beautiful colors and layouts are incredible and very cinematic. It even starts with a crawl, which I know that some of the other issues obviously have done in some of the other books, but this, it just feels right, and it looks amazing, especially showing sort of a reinterpretation of that scene where Luke gets his hand sliced off by Vader and learns that he's his father. So it's just, I thought this was a really cool introduction to the new Star Wars series ongoing, and hopefully, because we know that it is Disney canon, we'll get some more information about what happens between Empire and Return of the Jedi that might come up in future films, maybe not, or possible TV properties. Maybe the next second season of Mandalorian, they might introduce some characters that will show up.
Okay, the comic I'm going to talk about in some ways goes all the way back to the beginning, and in some ways only goes back to May of this year. Comic I want to spotlight is Star Wars number 108. The original Star Wars series from Marvel lasted 107 issues. It hasn't aged well if you do read stuff in the present day, but it was very much of its time. This was well before decompression in comic books, and it feels it. As I mentioned, the series ended in 1985 with issue 107, and earlier this year, under the Legends banner, we got an issue number 108. Apart from Luke and Leia and Han and Chewie and all of the regulars, we also got to see some of the characters that were introduced and were created specifically for the comic book series. Among them are Jackson, who, if you are not familiar with Jackson, he is, this is no lie, folks, a 7.5-foot green rabbit.
Yep.
You have Valance the Hunter, who was created in part by Walt Simonson, and was basically a cyborg, a very mad about being a cyborg bounty hunter that encountered the team on 2 separate occasions. We also have some of the other minor characters like a Mesa Fox Train and a villain Domina Tag. And if you do read it, it's a one-shot, and it reads really nicely as a one-shot. And if you do enjoy it, I think you might enjoy going back to the original source series. It's written by Matthew Rosenberg. There's a number of artists that contributed to it. And as this sort of one-off anomaly, it really had a nice charm to it. And one thing that I thought was very nice about it is only 7 weeks later with the Target Vader series, we have Valance the Hunter, slightly different version of him in canon. And I just thought it was so much fun revisiting these types of characters. Like, again, it's hard to recommend the original Marvel series. There's just weird things about it. At the after Jedi, it takes them forever to get off Endor, and there's no reason why they're leaving. There's so much weird stuff. There's an anniversary issue that this issue 50, which is supposed to tie up a lot of loose ends, but ends up providing more loose ends in the process. But there's also some great bits. The first real Boba Fett solo story came from the comic books. You also have just this exquisite art by Al Williamson when it comes to the Empire Strikes Back adaptation. So there is stuff to recommend for it, even through the lens of a present-day reader.
And Howard Chaykin did like the first 10 issues, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chaykin and Roy Thomas
Yeah.
as writer. And then Chaykin did a couple of covers later. You got a lot of big comic book names as the series progresses. Familiar names like Archie Goodwin, Carmine Infantino. You even have an annual that was written by Chris Claremont in the mix there.
Nice.
So there's stuff to recommend it. I don't want to make it sound like, it's old comic books and there's no value to it. There's no way I'm saying that.
Well, and the omnibus on that just came out this past year, so I've actually picked that up and eventually plan to read it.
I have the first Dark Horse omnibus, and that was enough. But Marvel has done beautiful jobs on those on the plural. I have to say omnibuy. They have done some really nice jobs with the Star Wars stuff, and some stuff that's coming up in the future as well, with some of these more recent series being collected in huge volumes. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up this episode of the Comic Book Bears, and when we wrap up an episode of this show, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment. And the bear community, if you woof at a fella, that means you find him attractive, and we're using that as a corresponding way to get out of this. So when we do a Woof of the Week, it is something, it might be a comic book or a charitable initiative or a TV program, anything under the sun that we think that you, fair listener, may be interested in sampling. Since this is a special Star Wars episode, it's going to be Star Wars themed. We are nothing if not gracious to our guests, so I will start with Craig. Craig, what is your Star Wars Woof of the Week?
Yep, mine is the Vader Immortal video game that was released for Oculus. Very, very good game. I actually bought the Oculus just to play that game. It's everything you want as a Star Wars fan. You get to play with lightsabers and the Force and blasters and all kinds of good stuff. So that's mine.
All right. Moving over to Mike. Mike, what is your Woof of the Week?
Mine is a book called Resistance Reborn. It's a relatively new book by a relatively new Star Wars author, Rebecca Roanhorse, and it takes place very shortly after The Last Jedi, and just kind of brings everybody up to speed with how the Resistance is getting themselves back together before the events of Rise of Skywalker happen.
Neat. Let's go over to Steve. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
Well, I briefly mentioned it in passing. We were talking about video games, but I do encourage everyone to go back and play, if they can, or just give a shot to the Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Obviously, it's part of the Legends universe, so potentially none of these are canon, but we did have a mention of Darth Revan that made it into, I believe it was Rise of Skywalker. There's a very slim mention of him, or quick mention. And if you're wondering who that is, you can go back and play Knights of the Old Republic, the first game. It's available on pretty much every platform. I'm sure you can even get it for Apple Watches or Texas Instruments calculators at this point. But it originally came out for the Xbox. It's available on Xbox Marketplace, Android, and Apple as well, if you can get it for your phone.
Okay, my Woof of the Week is a film. It's a documentary called Plastic Galaxy, the story of Star Wars toys. Steve, during the show you had mentioned the episode of The Toys That Made Us that focused on Star Wars. This naturally covers a lot of the same terrain, but takes a slightly different approach. There's a little more focus on the fans of the particular toys, and if you're wondering why us old folks wax so poetic about the Kenner toys, this documentary will explain everything to you regarding that. In some ways, it's the story of a toy line that completely changed an industry. There's a lot of material in the film, and some of it I certainly was not aware of before. And if you did enjoy the Toys That Made Us episode, you certainly would enjoy this. It is streaming on services like Tubi and the Roku channel, and was on Vimeo for years. You can buy it through iTunes, but that is my Wolf of the Week. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this one up for good now. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. We thank you for joining us for this special episode. Craig, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I really hope we can do this again. I know we don't have too much Star Wars content coming up in 2020, but maybe at the tail end of the Clone Wars extension, possibly?
Yeah.
Anytime you want us or want me, I'm available. Just let me know. It was a great pleasure being here.
Okay, and naturally, I want you gentlemen to give another push for your own podcast. Can you please, Mike? And then we'll go over to Craig.
Yeah, so it's the Real Gay Movie Show. It's REEL. And find us on all of the major platforms.
All right. And Craig?
Yeah, I'm with Southern Pride Geekery Podcast, and you can find us everywhere that podcasts are sold. We've got our Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram, so find us there, interact with us, and just a good, positive comic book community.
Awesome. And again, this podcast is the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to write to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, you can catch us through iTunes, through Libsyn, through Stitcher Radio, and many of the other podcatching platforms. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear Woof and an Explosion. We'll be back real soon, and this is the way.
Woof!